It is a good rifle and killed the bear that killed me.
I know who you are. You're the same dumb pilgrim I've been hearing for 20 days and smelling for 3.
The film that almost didn't happen. The story of Jeremiah Johnson began long before Robert Redford ever appeared on screen with a thick beard and the distant stare of a man shaped by the wilderness. Sidney Pollack had been developing the project for years, drawing from 2 books about frontier legends, Mountain Man and Crow Killer. He wanted to tell a story not just about the West, but about a man who walks into the mountains and never comes back the same. But to get the studio's approval, he needed one thing: a major star. Redford wasn't the first choice. That honor went to Clint Eastwood riding high after Dirty Harry.
I know what you're thinking. Did he fire 6 shots or only 5?
Warner Brothers believed he was the perfect fit. A rugged face, a tough persona, a name that would sell tickets.
Man's got to know his limitations.
Early meetings were held, scripts circulated, and for a moment, it looked like the film was his. But Eastwood read the role and walked away. The character was too internal, too quiet, too sparse in dialogue. "I need movement and lines," he said. "This man is made of silence." And just like that, the project was left without a star and on the verge of being shelved. Pollack refused to let it die. He called someone he trusted, an actor with whom he had already built a creative bond, Robert Redford. There was no pitch, no negotiation. Pollack simply asked, "Do you want to disappear into a character no one will recognize?" Redford said yes immediately, before he even received the script. He wanted to vanish into the role to become a man defined not by words, but by the silence around him. And so the golden boy of Hollywood, famous for his clean-cut image and effortless charm, agreed to transform into a wild mountain drifter, with a beard down to his chest and eyes hardened by solitude.
Ever get lonesome,
For what?
woman?
Full-time night woman?
At that moment, Jeremiah Johnson finally became a film that could exist not as a studio product, but as a story waiting to be lived. Filming on the edge of survival. When the crew of Jeremiah Johnson headed into the Utah mountains, most of them had no idea what they were walking into. The film wasn't shot on a backlot, or even near civilization. Pollack chose the remote Wasatch Range nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, a place with no roads, no power, and no safety net. It wasn't a location, it was wilderness. Every day the crew hiked miles through rugged terrain, carrying everything on their backs: cameras, tripods, clothing, food, even sound gear. Some days they filmed more than 12 miles from the nearest vehicle. If anyone got hurt, it meant hours of carrying them down steep slopes to find help. Nights were worse. Even in summer, temperatures dropped below freezing. They slept in tents, woke up with frost on their sleeping bags, and started working long before the sun warmed the valley. The cold was constant, a presence you couldn't ignore. Redford later said this was the most physically demanding shoot of his entire career, not because of stunts, but because every day was survival. You didn't act like a mountain man, you lived like one. The constant exposure changed people. Crew members grew beards, lost weight, and developed the weathered faces you see in the film. They stopped looking like Hollywood professionals and started looking like men who genuinely belonged to the mountains. It wasn't makeup. It wasn't design. It was what weeks of wind, cold, and exhaustion do to a human being. By the end, Pollack joked that they hadn't just made a movie about the wilderness, they had become part of it. The crew no longer felt like visitors. They were absorbed into the rhythm of the landscape, waking with the first light, racing to finish scenes before the sun dropped behind the peaks, shivering through evenings around cracked campfires. Jeremiah Johnson wasn't built inside a studio. It was carved out of snow, wind, and the kind of isolation that tests a person's limits. And that authenticity, the fatigue, the dirt, the rawness seeped into every frame of the film. The real Johnson was far more terrifying. The film's Jeremiah Johnson is a grim, quiet, haunted man, but the real figure who inspired him was far darker than anything Hollywood dared to show. His name was John Liver-Eating Johnson, and he was not simply a rugged mountain drifter. He was a frontier legend whose story blurred the line between man and myth, and whose brutality became the stuff of campfire horror tales. According to frontier lore, Johnson's transformation began with tragedy. His wife, a flathead woman, was pregnant when she was killed by a band of Crow warriors. What followed was not a moment of rage, but a decade-long vendetta. Johnson hunted Crow warriors one by one, tracking them through snow, forest, and canyon. Some accounts claim he killed over 300 men. Others say the number was smaller, but no less horrifying. And then there was the act that gave him his infamous name. Stories said that after killing his enemies, he would cut out their livers and eat them. Not out of hunger, but as a ritual of vengeance, a grim frontier gesture meant to steal strength from the fallen. Whether every detail is true or exaggerated, one fact is clear. The legend terrified anyone who heard it. Among the Crow, Johnson became a kind of ghost story. Parents warned their children not to wander into certain canyons. Warriors avoided specific passes, believing his spirit stalked the high ridges.
Oh, you better stop there.
He was less a man and more a mythic predator of the Rockies. The studio knew all of this, and they buried it. Hollywood did not want a protagonist who mutilated bodies and consumed organs. The real Johnson was a figure of raw vengeance, closer to a frontier monster than a romanticized mountain man. So the screenplay softened him, reshaping him into a reluctant survivor, a man capable of violence, but not consumed by it. Pollock once explained it simply: if we showed the real liver-eating Johnson, the film would be unwatchable. Instead, he offered audiences a myth. Wrapped in buckskin, a man touched by darkness, but not swallowed whole. The real Johnson, however, never escaped the shadows. He lived there, and that was the version the mountains remembered. Redford became a mountain man for real. To play a man who has spent years surviving alone in the mountains, Robert Redford knew that acting wouldn't be enough. He couldn't rely on studio tricks or choreographed gestures. If Jeremiah Johnson was going to feel real, Redford had to learn to live and move like a real mountain man. Before filming began, Pollock hired an actual wilderness expert to train him. This was not the kind of preparation actors usually get. Redford learned how to skin animals, how to set traps that wouldn't scare away prey, how to follow faint tracks through snow, and how to light a fire without a single match. He practiced for weeks in the same harsh terrain where the film would later be shot miles from roads, surrounded by cold, thin mountain air. And he refused to use a stunt double for almost everything. When Jeremiah drags a deer carcass through the forest, that's Redford. When he wades waist deep into a freezing river to pull out a trap, that's Redford, shaking from real cold. When he trudges through snow up to his thighs, that is not a performance. It is effort, exhaustion, breath turning to frost in real time. The mountains began reshaping him. He lost weight. His face hollowed, darkened, grew rough from wind and altitude. His hands blistered and split from rope, ice, and rock.
Take him.
What?
Take him!
Ma'am, I wouldn't know how to tend after it.
Crew members said he spoke less and less between takes, wandering alone, sitting by fires without saying a word, not as a method exercise, but because the silence of the mountains seeped into him. This wasn't Redford preparing for a role. It was immersion. Pollock later said that once filming started, Redford wasn't playing a mountain man anymore. He was one. His movements became instinctive, his reactions unforced. He had absorbed the rhythm of wilderness life, the patience, the economy of motion, the way a man freezes before moving, listening for threats the way animals do. And that authenticity shows in every frame. When Jeremiah Johnson walks, breathes, carries weight, hides from wind, or stares into fire, the audience isn't watching an actor pretending. They're seeing a man who has lived long enough in the mountains to forget where the performance ends. The silence they fought for. One of the most unusual features of Jeremiah Johnson is its opening, nearly 20 minutes, with almost no dialogue. No exposition, no narrator, no guiding voice. Just a man walking into the wilderness, and the wilderness answering with wind. Today, this silence feels bold and artistic, but in 1972, it caused a war between the filmmakers and the studio. Warner Brothers hated it. Executives insisted that audiences would never sit through such a quiet beginning. They urged Pollock to add voiceover, extra lines, anything to fill the void. People won't watch a movie where the star barely speaks, they said. But Pollock saw the silence as the heart of the story. Jeremiah's journey wasn't about words. It was about isolation, about dissolving into the mountains, letting the noise of civilization fall away. Pollock believed that if the audience didn't feel this silence, they would never understand the character. Redford fully agreed, and when the studio kept pushing, he delivered a threat that changed everything. If you add narration, take my name off the film. That was something Warner Brothers couldn't risk. Eventually, they agreed to test screenings. One version with the studio's added narration, and one preserving Pollock's original silence. The results shocked everyone. Audiences didn't just tolerate the quiet, they leaned into it. They watched Redford's face more closely, studied his movements, listened to the wind as if it were dialogue. Every spoken line that eventually appeared carried more weight precisely because the film had taught viewers to listen differently. Critics later called this opening meditative, hypnotic, even revolutionary for the Western genre. Yet at the time, it was simply a gamble taken by two men who believed that silence could speak louder than words. And in Jeremiah Johnson, it does. The film's quiet isn't emptiness, it's atmosphere, tension, transformation. It is the sound of a man shedding his old life and stepping into a world where the wind, not dialogue, becomes the narrator.